Hello, hello out there, peeps. Woo! This has been a ride. It's like a bad sci-fi movie we're all living through. But welcome, and thanks for joining us on the Switch4Good podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Dotsie Bausch, and I'm not alongside Alexandra Paul. She is beaming in on Skype from her home. And this is the first time that we have done this not right next to each other. So wish me luck here. Wish us all luck. But we're so happy that you tuned in. Alexandra, say hi.
Hi, Dotsie. I miss you already, but it's so great that we could still do the show.
Exactly. I guess the show must go on, right? So we have, really exciting guest who's also beaming in from his home in North Carolina. But before we dive in, I just want to remind you guys of something, if I may, which I've brought up on a couple of episodes ago. We are in the midst, Switch4Good, that is, we are in the midst of a battle, a fight. And that is to get dairy removed from the U.S. dietary guidelines, which may seem not as important to some people given what we're going through right now. But of all the things that have been canceled because of COVID-19, the dietary guidelines recommendations have not been canceled, and they will put them out this year in 2020, and they will last for 5 years. So I feel that it is our duty, and it's also our opportunity to speak up, to say what the truth is, to say to the committee that dairy is not a health food, right? It is time for our national dietary guidelines to reflect that. We know, and you know, if you listen to the show, that 65% of the global population is completely lactose intolerant. So that makes them very intolerant to all dairy foods. Yet the U.S. government recommends that we all consume 3 servings a day. And these numbers are much higher in people of color, up to 95%. 95% of Asians are completely intolerant to digesting dairy. And the symptoms are pretty ugly. The symptoms from being lactose intolerant range in severity. They include extreme stomach cramping, bloating and gas and constipation, even skin rashes, difficulty breathing, asthma. It's a big deal. And Canada realized this epidemic back in 2018 and removed dairy from its national recommendations. And we want to encourage the U.S. Dietary Guidelines Committee to do the same. So they are accepting public comments up until May 1st. So we've got a bit to go. All you need to do to state your case, to share your concerns, to speak up, is you just go to switch4good.org, and right when you go on the site, a pop-up will come up about 3 seconds later, and you just click right there. You're able to watch a video if you want to learn a little bit more, but there's also a place that you can just click in and submit your comment. We have a comment that's already written for you if you want to do it super easy, or if you want to write your own. But it's going to take all of us. We've already flooded with 5,000 comments from this campaign that we really just started. And our goal is 50,000 so that the committee will hopefully take this into consideration, because it's a big deal. So go to switch4good.org, switch the number 4good.org, and wait for the pop-up, and just state what matters, state what you care about, state why you think dairy is not a health food. And I know together we can do this. So
it's fast and easy, by the way, because I've done it. You don't have to write. If you write your own letter, you can only just write a few sentences. They figure if one person took the time to write, 20 people must care about the issue, or 50 people. So you become a superhero, actually, when you write a letter.
I love that. So become superheroes, everyone, right alongside us, and join us in this campaign. So spoiler alert, if you're watching on video, which would be fun if you are, this is who is on our show. It is Charlie Engle. And wow, Charlie has lived more lives and run more miles in his 57 years than any of us, well, I'll say for Alexandra and I anyway, can even fathom. He is a plant-based ultra distance runner with an emphasis on the ultra. He's also an author of the book Running Man, a memoir. He's a husband, a father, an incredible public speaker, a nonprofit co-founder, a producer, and a former addict. He even spent 16 months in prison for events unrelated to his addiction, which we'll dive into. In terms of running, this man has no limits. He completed a 111-day run through the Sahara Desert, which is chronicled in the documentary Running the Sahara, narrated by Matt Damon, where he ran for 27 hours to celebrate 27 years of sobriety, which this year he's going to do 28, and we're going to get into that too. And he's currently working on an excruciating challenge no man or woman has ever completed before, which we're going to dive into. Got a lot to dive into just in that intro alone, don't we, Alexandra? So welcome, Charlie, to the Switch4Good podcast.
Oh, man, thank you so much for that kind intro. And you got me all fired up with the, Switch4Good wording, and I just love what you're doing, and I appreciate the fact that you've had me on here, so thank you.
Absolutely. So we're very new friends, Charlie. I got the pleasure to meet you only about a month ago, before all this nuttiness unfolded with COVID-19, back when we were all allowed to hang out together in one room at the Lake Nona Impact Forum. And it was such a pleasure to meet you there. Your energy and your intensity and your enthusiasm and your love for all things people and animals and running and just setting records and pushing through boundaries and pushing past fear is so inspiring to me. And I am almost finished with your book, which you shared with me there and gave it to me and signed it. Super, super cool. So we have quite a bit to serpentine through. I mean, we're going to have you on 7 times because it's going to be difficult to get through it all, certainly in an hour. But I think, as all great stories are told, one place that we might start is somewhat near the beginning. And you were and maybe still consider yourself an addict. Do you still say you are an addict or were an addict?
The language that I like is that I say that I am an addict, and or I'll say I'm a recovering addict. I mean, to make it clear, but it's a good distinction, and I appreciate you noticing that, because I mean, it is my joke is always, I have friends who are Marines, right? And you don't ever say, former Marine or ex-Marine. You might say retired Marine, but like once you're a Marine, you're always a Marine, and I take the lead there when it comes to addiction recovery. I'm always going to be an addict, and it's part of who I am. And quite frankly, I wouldn't. I've embraced it to such a degree that I wouldn't change it, even if I had the opportunity to. If I could suddenly become a normal drinker or drug user, recreationally, I would never take that path, because it's become so much a part of just who I am, this recovering person, and all the things that go with the addictive nature that I have. If I can use my powers for good, it's a life that I never could have imagined.
Mm-hmm. So take us back to that person, because looking at you now, you're the picture of health. You've accomplished all this these amazing athletic endeavors. Take us back to when you were in college, when it first started rearing its head. Who were you then, and what were you doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's really when I went to college, I was a 17-year-old freshman. I went to University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, so a big school. And, I had been student body president in high school, and, tops in my class, and I played a lot of sports and dated a few cheerleaders, and and I was the man, right? And so I go to college, and I fully expect that I'm going to get that same sort of treatment there. And it took about a minute to realize that I was very average, and that in fact, there were 4,000 other freshmen there with me who had the same credentials. They had, and I didn't realize how needy I was, in the sense of needing to feel special. And suddenly I didn't have that. And I grew up an only child, and I mean, my parents are both addicts, and like I come by my addiction very honestly. And what I figured out was that I was an amazing, I mean, I may no longer be the standout in sports or a lot of other areas, but I was a first team All-American drinker, and I could drink more than anyone else. And it literally became part of my identity. And the drinking age was 18 years old. You know, I'm old enough that I was right on that cusp in the early 80s when all the ages were changed to 21. And, you know, we find our identities in strange ways. Sometimes we create it, and other times it creates us. And in my case, I found that I wanted to be invisible. Since I was no longer a superstar, so to speak, you know, I wanted to be invisible, and the best way I could do that was with drugs and alcohol.
That's so interesting that you use the word invisible, because I know, Dotsie, you've talked about walking down the street in New York when you were at the height of your anorexia and cocaine use. Is that right? And you also wanted to be invisible. And I've also used that term. My husband jokes at me about how I want to be invisible. So that I wanted to get so thin that I was invisible. That was what my goal was. And here we are, very much out there now. It's so ironic. So
we're not doing a very good job of that now, being invisible.
Exactly. But I'm surprised that someone who's using alcohol, which is sort of a big drug. And what were your other drugs of choice then? If I
could snort it, I would. I snorted enough to fill this kitchen. So cocaine was pretty much ubiquitous in the 1980s, and I was never a weed or a downer guy. I didn't want anything to make me go slower. I was looking for speed. So,
but yet you felt that made you invisible.
Yeah, well, you know what? I just felt like what it did is it made me feel almost the same word, invisible and invincible. And it like really put my brain on hyperspeed, and I had brilliant ideas, and I could, you know, when I was doing coke, it was, I wasn't myself, and I was maybe the best of myself. That's how it felt. And so the invisibility, I think, came, and maybe it actually came, if I think about it, in a lot of the other parts of my life, because of course my drug and alcohol use brought a lot of shame. It brought a lot of disappointment. It brought guilt. It, you know, pretty much all the things that I think we all relate to. And it took me a lot of years to figure out that I didn't need to be invisible, and that I could be enough without those things. I mean, it's been a long time for me at this point, but I still admit, you know, the insecurity is still there, and I have to work to keep it where it belongs and in perspective, or it will, you know, overtake. Like right now, we're doing this. I love that we're doing this, because I'll be honest, in this moment where we're all sort of sequestered, I feel like everybody else is doing important shit and I'm doing nothing. Like that's what my brain tells me, that I need to like drive and charge and always being doing something. And you know, it's hard for me to, if I don't have contact with other people, it's hard for me to keep that in check and not lose sight of the fact that we're in this crisis all together. Mm-hmm. And, you know, everybody's doing the best they can, but nobody's out there, you know, getting much done right now. We're all just doing the best we can. So anyway, I got off track, but that's all part of my addiction, you know, and my insecurity that even after all these years still sits there tapping me on the shoulder.
I think it's something that we're all struggling with, that part of what you just said right now. Like, what are we doing, and how are we relevant, and how I feel it's been hard with, running Switch4Good, given our message, and which is pretty much whoever's running anything is how is this message relevant, or how are people going to care? But the truth is, people are desiring to still care, right? They want they want to do what's right and care about the virus and act accordingly and stay away from other people to not spread it. But people need to care. They need to care what they cared about before. They need to care about what they feel like will bring goodness to the world. And so that is the inspiration to keep going, right? And all of us in whatever we're doing. But I want to ask you a question that I got asked so often. And I'm sure that you've been asked it ad nauseum, but I want to ask it because I've never heard you answer it. If you didn't run, do you feel like you would go back to your addiction with drugs and alcohol? Is it a replacement?
The question I got so often, and just for the listeners, the brief truncated version of my story is I spent 10 years as a really hardcore alcoholic and drug addict. And when I was 29, and I tried everything to quit, like in those 10 years, we all spend our lives, I believe, sort of chasing firsts, right? So that first high that I had from Coke, I spent the next 10 years trying to achieve that same set of circumstances because it felt like perfection. And of course, it's not possible to ever recreate that because you can't have that feeling for the first time. And 10 years later, I found myself sitting on the ground outside a dumpy motel room with the cops going through my car, and there's bullet holes in the car, and I have a son at home who's 2 months old, and even he couldn't save me. There was this real feeling in that moment that finally I had hit some bottom where the realization was no one else and no outside force is coming to change this for me, and I have to figure out how to do that for myself. So that day, I actually went to a meeting that night, a recovery meeting, and the next day I got up and put on my running shoes. And for the next 3 years, I actually went to a meeting and I ran every single day without missing one day. I did those two things, a meeting and a run. And I ran 30 marathons. And as I always say, because clearly I had that whole addiction thing under control. And people asked regularly, and they don't just ask, they ask as an accusation, or they accuse as a question. I'm not sure which, but it's didn't you just switch addictions?
Yep.
And of course that's like an earworm, and it gets in my head, and I ask myself over and over, is that what I did? And it took me those 3 years of running every day, because every day I ran as hard as I possibly could, to the point of puking, because I was trying to pound out my addict. And if I could have taken a scalpel and just cut that part of me out, I would have done it. What I learned instead, though, was my addict is all the best parts of me. Without my addict, I probably wouldn't be good at anything. And so while addiction, there's no comparison, actually, because it's about having no feelings. Or if I had one, heaven forbid, I would drink or drug it away. I'd find a way to shove that feeling into a dark corner. I'll deal with you later. And I never did. Running is the exact opposite. With running, there's a bright spotlight on me all the time. When I'm running, there's no hiding in a marathon or 100-miler. There's nowhere to go when you dive into the abyss. So the beauty of it is I actually get to be completely who I am when I'm running. So your question really was, would I drink if I couldn't run? The answer is no, for sure, for me, because more than anything, I love running, but I also love cycling. I love paddling. I love, I happen to be known for running, but the outlet and the endorphin release and all that I get from running, I actually could find it in some other sport. I really could. I love running, but as long as I can be outside. And if I couldn't be outside, I don't know. I love literature. I like to think that if I was like, housebound or in a wheelchair or something like that, that I would be resilient enough to find, a way through without drinking and drugs. And, you can't know until you get there, but I'm able to project. I'm sorry to go on this, but I think you guys probably get the question too. Like, I get asked often, couldn't you just have a beer? And I'm like, yeah, I could. Like, I'm confident today, after 27 years, if I wanted to have a beer today, I could probably have a beer. I could probably do it tomorrow. I might be able to do it next week. But there would come a day where I would have 2 beers. And then I would have all the beers. And then I would have all the drugs. And like, there's no benefit to the first beer. There's zero benefit to it because it will lead to the same place. And I think the mistake people make in the moment is they make bad decisions to relapse, whether it's with food, whether it's with drugs or alcohol. They haven't given themselves a mechanism to get past the hard moments. Because normally if we can just get past that hard moment, things look different the next day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
May I ask you, do you have the same feelings and you just handle them differently? Or because of the way your life is now, do you not have those feelings at all? And I'll tell you why I ask this is because when I was very bulimic, I felt I had a hole literally in my chest that I filled with food and then vomited it up. And then I was so exhausted, I didn't even think about that hole anymore. I felt a physical hole. And then after going to the 12-step program and doing the 12 steps, and I guess therapy, which I had already been in for 12 years, I don't feel that hole anymore.
Yeah.
So sometimes I almost feel it. Like in the last 20, I've been abstinent for 28 years. So just a year ahead of you. So I recognize that time.
No one's competitive on the show.
I'm coming for you.
I recognize those times when if I was back then, I would have gone into a spiral. They don't happen very often, though. They happen maybe once or twice a year, maybe every other year. So I'm wondering, do you still get those feelings and deal with them differently, or do you not feel plagued by this pain that you had?
I get them for sure. And again, I think you nailed it. You did the 12 steps, and like for me, I freely say, like, if I had just gone to meetings, I don't know if I could have stayed sober. If I had just run, I don't know if I could stay sober. What I got out of those 2 places, and I have a third one in my life too now, which I'll tell you about, but from recovery meetings, because I didn't just do AA, I did a lot of different kinds, but and then also the adventure running is community, is fellowship, is that helped fill the hole also. So I needed the physical exertion of taking the edge off of my crazy, as I like to say. And then I needed sort of the spiritual grounding foundation of 12-step recovery to be sitting in a room with other people who had the same issue. Today, I also have the plant-based community, and it's interesting how there's a lot of commiseration, between, as you well know, between these communities. And I have a ton of friends who are runners, recovering addicts, and plant-based. And, and I've sort of found my community, and that has really helped fill that void. I do believe, too, though, that the power of those first 3 years for me still live very much today, because I am not a person that's good at half measures, as we say, because I'm either all in or I'm not. And so I needed those 3 years of dedication and of really developing a new way of life, a new set of habits, a new way of kind of caring about myself that I didn't have before. the beauty of like my book is that, and I mean, I'm not selling the book here, but the great thing is I wake up almost every day to messages from recovering addicts in Russia, in China, in like all over the world, here in the US, of course, too, from people who are either saying thank you, or they're saying help me, or they're saying my son this, my daughter that, my mom, you know, and they have questions. And the way that I stay sober today still is, you know, I run, I go to meetings. I don't go to a lot of meetings anymore, but then I answer a lot of questions for people out there in the world. And they don't understand. They think I'm helping them, you know, and while that's a side benefit, if I get to help them, I'm really helping me. And you guys know that because of what you do.
Yeah. I'm dying to get into the running because there's so much there. But right before we do, I'd love for our listeners to just have an experience with you and about you that was one of my favorites in the book, which was pretty much was your rock bottom. And you mentioned it. But would you tell them the story of, I guess, one of those final benders when you and you arrived home with the bullets in your car, all through your car, and you had a 2-month-old son in the house, so they can have an experience of the depths of what you're speaking about.
Yeah, I mean, it was, you know, first of all, when my son was born, he didn't know it, but he was going to save me. Right. So this newborn baby was finally going to be the linchpin that would save my life, because I'd been to rehab. I'd gone to meetings. I had tried going to church. I'd tried, you name it. I'd pretty much given it a shot, you know, and I talked to therapists and I'd done all that. And I just knew for sure that just his birth, like just him being on this planet, was going to change everything for me. And I remember holding this tiny little baby in my hands and like feeling love both for him and from him that as an addict, I really didn't think that I would ever feel, because I just thought that I was broken, and not just broken, but actually undeserving of that kind of love from another person, because I knew who I was. I knew that I was an imposter out there in the world, and that, you know, if people really knew who I was, that they would be horrified. And so finally, this baby is going to change all that. And for a couple of months, it kind of worked. You know, I mean, just the power of love made it work. But the problem is I wasn't doing anything else. You know, you can eliminate your addiction, whatever that might be. But if it's not replaced with something else, and in particular, replaced with positive, powerful things that occupy your time, because it's not like I drank and did drugs 24 hours a day, but I damn sure thought about them 24 hours a day. So if I wasn't doing them, I was planning for the next time I was going to do them. And if I was doing them, I was planning for how I was going to make up for the big mess that I was causing, and how I'd, you know, be a good boy for a week or a month or whatever. And like, it was exhausting. And so finally this baby was going to change that. And like my car had a mind of its own. A couple months after my son was born, I'm driving to the worst neighborhood in town, where I spend 6 days smoking crack and drinking, and not, you know, I didn't have a minute of sleep in 6 days. And, you know, I finally am there handcuffed on the ground with the police searching my car. And this policeman, and this was a really big moment for me. This policeman looked through my car, and he reaches under the driver's seat and he pulls out a pipe, a little glass crack pipe. He turns around and looks at me and shakes his head, and like that condemnation and shame is like just filling me up. And, you know, any like even remotely rational person would have been saying, oh man, I'm in some serious trouble. Like, I'm going to jail. I got, you know, all these things are going to happen. And all I can think is, you know, so that's where that pipe was. Right? I mean, like,
thank you.
I wonder if there's anything left in there. It's like, do you mind if I hold that, officer? You know, it's like my thinking was so sick. I was so sick that that's all I could think. And in that moment, I actually got after 6 days of no sleep and all the drugs and alcohol, I had the clearest thought I've ever had. Nobody is coming to save you. There is if you don't make this decision to save yourself, it's not going to happen. And you know what? A lot of people make that same decision, you guys included. And I don't know why some of us, I can't answer the question why some of us make it and some don't. Like there's, because it easily could have been any of us that didn't make it, easily. And I recognize that. And I think maybe I stay sober today partly because I would be horrified to think that I've wasted the good fortune that I've had and actually getting sober while so many of my friends have died through the years. And I wouldn't want to feel that. So I appreciate the question. I mean, running filled a gap. And then I basically started to run addictively. I recognize that, but I'll take that over what I was doing any day.
One of the stories in your book that is, well, it's like, I keep saying it, one of my favorite stories. There's a lot of favorite stories in your book that I have. But one of those first runs where you were going to compete, you were running at that point of time to basically punish yourself. And your very first ultra was a mistake. I don't remember where you were in the world, but you were out in the middle of nowhere and you drove very far to get there because you had entered a 5K and you were like, it's just 5K, like it'll be fine. But it was actually a 52K. And you loved it and you won the race. What was that like, and what was that it had to have been certainly a turning point. I mean, to think that you're going to do 5K, but then pull that off is not something that all of us would be able to do.
I mean, who knew people ran that far, right? It was like, this is in Australia and I'm there just working. And yeah, and I drove and in the book, the story about I ran over a kangaroo on my way to the race, and like I'm an animal lover, and it freaked me out. And like, I just wanted to go get a t-shirt and have an experience. And I get there and I've like literally pinned my number on and I'm standing near the start line and I'm listening to these guys say, yeah, it's going to be a hot one out there today. I hope I can finish before dark. I'm thinking, man, these Aussies are slow. It's like, what are you doing? Crawling? And, one of them actually looked at me and said, so have you ever ran a 50K, mate? And I'm like, no, why? And like, I walk back over to the desk and the cute girl behind the little registration desk, I'm like, excuse me, do you have a map of the course? And like, it says right there, the Nango Rainforest, 52K. And I look down at my number that's pinned on me. It says 52K. I'm like, it just never dawned on me, which shows, my addict brain is always somewhere else. And I wasn't paying attention. And anyway, I did decide that I would just, I was there. It was a 3-loop course. So each loop was a little over 10 miles. And I'm figuring I'll just do one loop and I'm done. I'm out of here. And I came back around on that race and the announcers at the finish line, like, oh, here comes the Yank. He's in 10th place. And I'm like, fantastic. I'm running for all of North America now. And I actually decide I'm going to quit. And I make my way to my car on the second loop and I'm going to get in the car and drive away. And I realize I've left my keys in a bag right at the feet of the announcer. And so I either have to humiliate myself or make up I could limp back in and say I sprained my ankle. I mean, my addict brain went through all of the excuses. I was like, fine, I'll just do the second loop, but then I'm quitting. And it was when I finished the second loop that everything changed, because I think this is the most important part of this story. When I got around on that second loop, just like out of nowhere, the thought hit my mind. It's like, you could go ahead and just finish this. Like, you didn't plan on running that far today, but you've now done 2/3 of this. Why not go ahead? And I decided I would forge ahead. And I was sunburned and had blisters and I was dehydrated. And I was a disaster. But interestingly, I did end up winning the race. And I didn't, I think some of it is because the universe sometimes does for us what we can't do for ourselves. Like I had no expectations that day other than to show up and run a 5K. My win was not heroic. I mean, the story, I could spin the story if I wanted and say how awesome I was. I tried to quit half a dozen times. It's like, but my ego, the only thing that stopped me was my ego. Like I didn't want to be embarrassed by quitting, or at least not quitting in front of other people. If I could have just, disappeared, then I probably would have. But and I think that that's a good analogy for a lot of our lives. Sometimes we are put into situations that we didn't expect to be in, case in point right now, and we don't know what's going to come out of it. But if we do just keep moving, just continuous forward movement without projecting what the outcome is going to be, then we get surprised sometimes.
Yeah.
That's one of the tenets that you seem to live by, is that you can't control what happens to you, but you can take responsibility for how you react to it, which actually is, have you read Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning?
So we talked about prison. We talked about prison at the beginning of this a little bit. I don't even know if we'll get to that today, but I bet 10 people sent me that book while I was in prison. And so not only did I read it, I possibly memorized it. Go ahead and continue. Book. It's a brilliant, it is one of the books that helped me through that experience.
I highly recommend it. It's not a big book, so those of you who are looking for something to read now, when we're in this circumstance where we can't control it, it's a great read. But so I really admire your philosophy here, because it's gotten you through a lot of challenges in an honorable way. And one of them was when you were running across the Sahara, and this was a documentary that was made about your run. Narrated by Matt Damon and called Running the Sahara. And it was a feat that was incredibly challenging. And you not only were a runner, but you were also a producer, and you instigated the whole idea. So you had a lot of responsibilities. And there was a story you tell about how one day you just realized that you didn't have control. Which is really hard for someone who was an addict or is an addict or has an addictive personality. Tell us a little bit about that story and what we can learn from it, because I was inspired when I heard you tell that story.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, it's such a crazy thing, because I just had this idea. I didn't have the idea, actually. Someone else had the idea, asked me this question just off the cuff, have you ever thought about running across the Sahara? And I do like to say that, words said to us by a stranger in passing can sometimes change like the entire course of our lives. Like you don't know what's going to come of that. And that's what happened with the Sahara. And I started telling people I was going to be the first person ever to run across the Sahara. And crazy as it is, I got James Maul, who is an Academy Award-winning director, and Matt Damon signed on to this thing. So I had 2 Academy Award winners attached to a project about running across sand. Very exciting. And, a year after all this came together, I was in Senegal in West Africa and surrounded by my 2 teammates. We were all 3 going to run the whole way. 15 crew people and cameramen and like all these people. And I really did. In my imposter syndrome, I'm like sitting there going, I've suckered all of these people out here to the Sahara, and we're all going to die. And, and it took about a week, but a week into this expedition, we fell apart, completely fell apart. It's 140 degrees every day. It's like my 2 teammates are on IVs. I've had crew members quit. We've run out of food and water. We've gotten lost in sandstorms. And I realized that I was approaching this project, this run, completely wrong. I felt so much pressure to be successful, like everyone's depending on me, right? And I mean, that's how I felt. It really wasn't the case, but that's how it felt. And I was focused on getting to the finish. Like all I was going to do was get to the finish. And I recognized that's not how you get to the finish. So on day 8, I woke up and all I thought about was running one marathon, like before lunch. And I took a break at lunch and all I focused on was running a second marathon before dinner. And after dinner, I laid down on my thin foam mat and I stared up at a billion stars, and I gave thanks for the fact that I was out there suffering and alive and having this experience. And the lesson I learned in that was the one day at a time. It's this whole lesson of recovery, right? I could only run the miles that were right in front of me, and I was killing myself focusing on the problems that were going to come the next day, or when we hit the next border crossing, or when this happened and when that happened. And it really almost tanked the entire expedition. I like to tell the story, which I don't think I told when you guys heard me speak before, but is every day of the Sahara, I woke up at 4 a.m. every day, made my coffee because I am a coffee snob, and I wrote down my day's schedule, number of miles we're going to run, where we're going to go, what we're going to do. I got out the maps. I did it all. I was I needed to have that plan. At the end of the 111 days, I went back, basically went through the daily plans. And on about 10 of those days, it actually went the way I wrote it down, which means on more than 100 days, it either went a little bit wrong or it went completely wrong. Couldn't have gone more wrong. Yet we made it to the end. We put our feet in the Red Sea almost 5,000 miles later and completed this mission. And it only happened through this idea of focusing on what was right in front of me and dealing with that and trusting that the next day it was going to come, and the problems for that day would present themselves and I would deal with them as they came. And it's a good lesson for, of course, for today, for what we're all dealing with, and for anybody that struggles with addiction of any kind is, most of us have, as we call them, magnifying minds, and we project these problems out into the world. And we think, I still struggle today. The thing I struggle with almost more than anything else was social media. We all deal with social media. 99 out of 100 people can love me, but who am I focused on? Yeah. I'm focused on that one person that writes the nasty comment, and I will I'll lose my entire day, my peace of mind, everything, because I so desperately want that person to like me. And it's that's the craziest thinking ever, when what I need to do is focus on the people that love me. And so it is about always coming back to only this moment. That was a really long answer. Sorry.
No, the addict's mind is like a rapid fire mind. And I think there's so many pieces of it that are helpful in getting us through life, like you're just describing. And it resonated so deeply when you were talking about the 52K and figuring out all of the possibilities of how you could potentially quit the race. And I realized that I think that the good parts of the addict's brain are what truly keep us going. I remember vividly doing long distance road races in the middle of a stage race in freezing cold temperatures in Belgium, sleeting sideways, literally almost feeling like I'm getting, some kind of weird facial by the sleet hitting my face, and riding and looking down and going through multiple scenarios of how I could quit. But I didn't want to say I was quitting because I was quitting. Something had to be wrong with my bike. So I would look down at the tire and think, where can I find a razor blade? Maybe there'll be one in the gutter. Where is there a pin? How can I pop the tire? Is there a way for me to rip the rear derailleur off and with them out not knowing that I did it? Could I sideswipe a tree and rip the rear derailleur off? How can I figure out for something to, just self-implode in the bike? Because it couldn't be me, right? I couldn't admit that I was struggling, and I was suffering like a dog and I was barely hanging on, but I wanted it to be over so badly. And all of those processes that addict brain goes to kept me going, because before I know it, I was where you were. I mean, I didn't win very many of those races, but all of a sudden I was like 5K from the finish. And on a bike, you can finish 5K pretty quick. And there you were, and there you did it. And you showed yourself, I can do that. And the next time, and the next time, and the next time.
So I was at a race called the Raid Goa. It was a French race doing adventure racing back in the day. And I was doing, Eco Challenge, Raid Goas, and this is early 2000s. And I'm in Nepal, and like one of my teammates quits because he gets high altitude sickness. I mean, he doesn't quit. He's actually pulled medically from the race. But this is a team of 5 people. And if you lose one team member, you're out of the race. Like you're no longer in the rankings. You are allowed to continue, though, as an unranked team. So nobody on the team stepped up to say, let's keep going. Let's have this experience because we're here. We're in Nepal, for God's sake, right? So we end up withdrawing from the race. Well, in Nepal, guess what? It's not like you just go grab a taxi and then you're heading home. It took 2 days for us to even get to civilization. And what we ended up having to do, we were in the sag wagon, which of course, hopefully you've never been in there.
I've been in many sag wagons.
We're in the sag wagon, which of course is at the back of the race. And so we had to spend 2 days watching other teams who didn't quit, who were at the back of the pack, struggling their asses off. And 30 minutes after I quit and got on that bus, I could not have regretted a decision more in my life. And that moment sticks with me. Anytime I think about quitting something, anytime I think about relapse, life we spend 99% of our time in life preparing for the 1% of the time, or maybe less, when things really go wrong. And that's when we have to find a way to get past that moment. Because most of the time our lives are pretty good, even when they're hard. They're just kind of you're trudging along the path. That's the way life is. And occasionally it tanks, and that's when we feel like giving up. And you have to have mechanisms in place. People, meetings, athletics, you have to have stopgaps, safety nets in place, because in that moment, you're not going to discover them. They have to be in place beforehand.
Mm-hmm. What do you advise? I'm sure a lot of people write to you who aren't athletes, runners. And they ask for help with their addiction. What do you tell them if they definitely are not going to, you can't say go run. Yeah. Go to maybe you say go to a meeting or find community.
Yeah. You know what? And I think here's what I stay away from. And again, my sense is you guys are probably the same. Unless someone really asked me for advice, which is different than sort of reaching out and saying, here's what's going on. Mm-hmm. So I like to frame things like this. I can't tell you how to do it, but here's how I did it. What I tell people, though, is for sure, you have to seek out community. What is your community? It could be art. It could be, I do think that some form of recovery is important, because it's important to understand the disease to a certain degree, and also to find a way to alleviate the guilt that most of us carry for the behaviors that we do. You don't starve yourself or drink yourself into a coma or do 8 pounds of cocaine because life is awesome. And you have to dig into some of the reason. But I think just understanding some of it and then realizing that the solution is far more important than staying buried in the cause. You spend your whole life looking for the cause. And yeah, you need to kind of understand a little bit of that, but then it's about what am I going to do about it? Mm-hmm. And so I do encourage people often to just seek alternatives, find a new path, but it has to be about commitment. You can't half-ass it or you're not going to make it.
Yeah, I think that it's pretty important for addicts to recognize. I'm learning that and thinking about it while you're speaking, that maybe our brains are potentially a little bit more, chemically enhanceable than the next person's, and that we need maybe more of an endorphin or dopamine release than the next person, or because we created that throughout our addiction, our brain still needs that. It reminds me of that scene in the documentary about Alex Honnold, when they did the MRI and they studied his amygdala, and it was completely different than anyone they'd ever seen, because he needs so much more to get a thrill or get a kick. And then there you have what Alex Honnold does, which most of us can't even fathom. His brain is different. And I think if we can recognize that, then there's so many areas of our lives that we can lean into that and enhance those areas of our brain and have those chemicals release in a really super incredible positive way, whether it's through community or whether it's through exercise. And you don't have to be an ultra runner, right? Like I'm the serious power walker. I can say it. I'm proud of it.
Yeah.
Like that. Just if I can't get anything else done that day, that has to happen, because I feel like I need a little bit of release, and if I don't get it, 48 hours later, I am a very anxious person and not cool to be around. And look, diet and nutrition, of course, is another place that I do direct people, and I try to be, I watch what you guys do, and it's brilliant, because it's, you can't force it on people, but you can try to welcome them to this idea of trying something new. And so when someone does actually reach out to me and ask for ways that they can change, I try not say, first of all, if they're a non-runner, I'm not going to suggest they start running 50 miles a week. If they spend 7 days a week eating meat, I know it's actually not productive for me to tell them they should quit 100%. I want to encourage them to start moving in that direction. Nutrition plays a huge role in my mood, in how I feel, of course, physically. And when I made the decision to become plant-based a very long time ago, it really changed everything for me. I mean, it changed my perception. And I grew up in North Carolina. I ate what was put on my plate, which was a lot of vegetables, but a whole lot of meat and a whole lot of dairy. And, and when I made those changes, I did it where I basically said, look, for 30 days, I'm going to be, I really probably at that time, 20 years ago, I said vegetarian, because I don't even think I knew the word vegan. I just said, I'm going to stop doing these things for a while and see what happens. And 30 days later, I felt great, and I just never went back.
What prompted you to stop in the first place 20 years ago?
Yeah, I think it was really about wanting to see if I could perform better athletically as much as anything else, and I do like to make the joke that of course it was about a girl, even way further back than that, and in my 20s, when I was still very much an addict, I met somebody, and she had been a gymnast in college, and she was the first person. There was an old book called Eat to Live back in the 80s, and it was the first time that I was introduced to this idea of lower fat eating and a combination of carbohydrates and protein, and there were a lot of recipes in there that included, tuna and things like that. So in my early days, though, I learned how much eating better, just eating healthier, even as an addict, would make me feel better. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I'd dive off the deep end and spend 6 months killing myself, and then I'd come back to the bright side. But, I think it was just this. It's like I say about addiction and recovery. And again, you guys relate to this. Once you know that there is another way, you may go back to your addictive ways, whether it's around eating or food, or drugs or alcohol, but you can no longer say, I don't know what to do about it. Like that little cry for help where you're going, I don't know how to stop doing this. You actually do know how to stop doing it. Once you've gone through some treatment and gotten therapy and you've had some healthy time, you do know what to do. And so it doesn't mean it's easy to get back into that. But once I learned that I could be healthier, even in my worst times, I had that hope that, okay, I know where I'm going to go once I get back, into a healthy lifestyle.
You were so far, that's very far ahead of your time to just all of a sudden one day think if you dropped animal products, you might enhance your performance, because most people haven't thought about it until this year. I'm curious as to, did somebody say something, or did you just have how in the world, because we're steeped now, and have been for many years in a pretty male-centric climate that is, meat equals protein equals muscle, and that's the only way that a lot of people think. So what was it for you? They were like, hey, maybe I'll try this. Why did you think it would work?
So I'm an animal lover, and I couldn't even tell you what it was, but I read a couple of books and some articles, and I understood, especially right here in North Carolina, with hog farming, and with, we're one of the worst states in the country when it comes to animal farming. And I think once you look past the nice little clean, cool little packages that are sitting in your grocery store of a nice steak, and you really understand where that came from, I've never understood how anybody could actually eat that again. So somewhere way back, I just recognized that I wanted to make a change. And I also think, I have no idea if it was timing or what, but I quit eating meat and I started winning races. And so I like to win. It's fun. And, and I figure even at my age, at 57, I don't enter races to just finish. I'm happy if I just finish, but I still like to go out there and do my absolute best.
So what are you planning on doing next? Because you've challenged yourself so many ways. After running across the Sahara, you ran across America. Now you have a new challenge, which is no one's ever done before either. Tell us about that.
And firsts in the adventure world are really hard to come by. And so I thank you for asking. It's called the 5.8 Global Adventure Series. And in essence, I am going from the lowest elevation on all 7 continents to the highest elevation on each continent. I call it 5.8 because the ultimate version of this 7-continent challenge is to go from the Dead Sea, which is the lowest place on the planet, to the top of Mount Everest. And it's about 5,000 miles between those 2 points. And to get there, I have to swim in the Dead Sea, run across the Arabian desert, kayak across the Indian Ocean, mountain bike across India to Everest Base Camp, and then climb to the top. So it's a really, arduous journey. And so it's almost 5,000 miles, but it's actually only 5.8 vertical miles from the lowest place to the highest point. And that's where the name came from. And we're in 3 separate places right now, but all 3 of us are within that 5.8 mile little sliver of atmosphere that surrounds the planet. Mm-hmm. We're all on this journey of low places and high points. And it's pretty much a never ending roller coaster for all of us. And it is, we spend most of our time in the middle, but we have these really amazing experiences and then sometimes these crushing experiences on the other side. And I think it's that shared experience of lows and highs that draws us all together. And, I like telling stories, and I like to go out and do things so I have stories that I can write about and that I can tell. And so I appreciate you asking. For those that want to follow, it's all on my website. It's just charlieengle.com. I also know we didn't get to a bunch of stories today, but, people are going to want to know, why was he in prison? You might just have to read the book and figure that out.
Yeah. We are going to do Charlie Engle part 2. We are absolutely not too long from now. And read the book so then you're a little bit more inquisitive about, and you have bigger questions about the prison story. It's just been such a joy to get to know you. You've been wildly inspiring to me, both getting to meet you in person and reading your book, and then today. And my favorite line from today that I will just probably take with me forever is when you said, "My addict is the best part of me."
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
It's powerful. It's powerful. We just have to keep using that for good. And I think all three of us agree we're lucky that we've got that gene, and, we just got to keep supporting each other and move it in the right direction.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Charlie. It was wonderful to talk to you. And everybody, just get the book Running Man, especially if you're incarcerated in your home right now. It'll be inspiring, and so thank you.
Good. All right.
It's funny, I've sold, and the audio book has sold like 3 times as many as the print book, which I think shows that these days runners and athletes and people like to listen to things too. I did have to audition to actually read my own book. So you do have to, if you buy it, you have to listen to me for like 11 hours. So
That's fantastic.
Prepared.
Bad. Yeah. That's not bad at all. It's funny, we had Howard Lyman on, who wrote Mad Cowboy, and he published that book 20 years ago, but he says now the audio version is just selling like crazy. So thank you
We're all
for
consuming our media. Case in point, we get great information from podcasts, and I love what you guys do. I support it 100%.
Thank you.
And just next time I come on, I'll tell you my horrendous dairy stories. So needless to say, I don't do dairy, and the world is a better place for it.
Okay. All right. You're on. All right. Part 2. You guys stay tuned. Bye, Charlie.
All right. See you guys. Take care.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switch4good.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to Switch for Good. This is the future.